What's up, everybody, and welcome to the State of Wild, episode 20, a regular podcast, YouTube video, web series thing. Damn, 20 episodes. That's a long time. And so for this special episode, as usual, we've got Corbett joining us tonight. Corbett, how you doing, friend?
Hey, what's up, Mia? I'm doing very, very well. I've had a quiet couple of days. No major news or anything's really happened recently. So yeah, it's been pretty chilled out. What about you?
It's been going pretty well. It's a stressful week, but this weekend brought about some good news, so it's good end to the week. And for those of you guys that are watching us on YouTube, you kind of already spoiled a little bit of the surprise, but we've got another guest joining us for our special 20th episode. We've got the famous Wild Hearthstone personality, content creator, and overall just great guy, Roffle, joining us tonight. Dude, thank you so much for joining us. How's your weekend going?
Like you, it has been a bit of a stressful week, but good news towards the end. And plus, we got some cards revealed, so I'm looking forward to taking a look at some of those and seeing more of those roll out as we get closer to the expansion.
Yeah, dude, all the cards are going to be coming out in 6 days. It's really exciting. And for those of you guys that might actually be joining us for the first time this episode, we normally do three things during a normal episode of the State of Wild. So we talk about the Wild meta, what's dominating, how to beat it, and decks that might be flying underneath the radar. We talk Wild news, controversial topics, or maybe the lack thereof. And last but not least, we talk about our decks of the week, both meta, off meta, and just general fun decks to play. But before we go ahead and get started, just a reminder to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy our content. It helps us out with that YouTube algorithm, right? It really does help us a lot. But with all of that being said, let's go ahead and dive right on in. The meta hasn't really shifted a ton, right? Because we're at the end of an expansion cycle. There's very little experimentation. Nobody's really trying to break the meta. We're all just waiting for the new cards. So, let's go ahead and start talking about the new cards. So, we've had about 42 cards, I think, revealed so far out of the new set. And we kind of want to just go ahead and dive right on in. And since we're not going to be doing kind of card review, let's talk about just what are the two cards that are revealed so far that are your favorite, have you the most excited to play with? And let's go ahead and start off with Roffle.
All right, so the first one is, for me at least, is ETC God of Metal. First of all, I really like the character of ETC. I remember the concerts back in my WoW days, but on top of that, I feel like I had a lot of fun with just different variants of Rush Warrior in the previous expansion. Town Crier especially makes that kind of an interesting archetype in Wild specifically. So I'm looking forward to just kind of toying around with that. The one thing that I probably will try on day one is a silly OTK with him where you can go Penflinger on the ETC, copy it a couple times with Bloodsworn Mercenary, and then play a Broom. And so since you have 3 copies of ETC, 7 minions attacking with Rush, you're doing 42 total damage, assuming you can get some value trades on the ETC. So it's ambitious, but with the ability to, I think with the draw engine that you have in Battle Rage, I think you could probably get there, as well as just stack armor with Armor Smith or something like that. So I think it's probably not a great card, but it's a cool card, and again, I just like the character, so I'm looking forward to that.
I was just going to say, I wonder about the viability, just like in general, like sticking it in Galakron Shell, right? Is a 2-mana 1/4. The body itself is not the worst thing in the world, right? That's Armor Smith stats.
It's not bad, but is running the card worth a spot in your deck when you already have more than enough ways to deal damage to the opponent's face with Galakron Warrior, right? Like, it just feels a little bit, I don't know. I don't know if you want to pay 2 mana for probably what'll end up being 2 damage. Although, I mean, it's 6 damage with the Scion once you get it fully ramped. So there's definitely some potential there, but like, I don't like cards that rely on sticking for a turn or two in Wild to get value off of them like that. I just want them to be good when they come down. And so I would be skeptical of that, but it'd certainly be fun to play around with. I'm looking forward to the animation from this too. That card's gonna rock.
OG ETC.
Yeah, I was really surprised when they said that Broomstick would actually work with this card. I thought that might have been like a consistency issue with how some other like your X minions work. But yeah, apparently it does work, as is confirmed by I think Celestone on Twitter. So yeah, it really opens up a lot of possibilities. I think the Broom specifically.
Right. The wording does, because it's Rush minion rather than minion with Rush or whatever the case may be. But yeah. So it'll be fun to test out. I don't think it'll be necessarily bad in Galakron. I just don't think it'll be necessary. Beyond that, the second card is Grand Empress Shekzara. Sure. We'll go with we'll go with
enough.
Shrek. Shrek. It looks
Shrek?
nothing like an ogre, but that's fine. So it's a battle cry. Discover a card in your deck and draw copies of it. So obvious first place that you would go with this is Mogu Cultist into Tog Scheme. Put 7 of them in your deck. You play this for 6. Then follow that up on turn 7, and you get all 7 of them down, assuming that you can obviously clear this from the board. You could even save that for turn 10 to get the double end of turn effect and get the 40 damage. So there are definitely some possibilities in there. You could also, what I'm looking forward to as well, is just dumping it in Pogo Rogue. So again, you shuffle in the Pogos, set this up, play it, then just drop a board full of pretty large Pogos at that point. And it's super greedy and it definitely won't be competitive, but I've had a lot of fun doing something similar with Tack. And so if it can work with Tack, who is hot garbage, it'll be probably a little bit more effective with something that actually has relevant stats for its cost and has a more immediate impact in terms of you don't need to hold cards to set it up. You just play your deck naturally and then slam this and keep going. But basically any card that you wouldn't mind having multiple copies of, this is going to be fun. Even, I don't know, something as disgusting as Cold Light Oracles, where you don't really care about burning cards in your deck after you've shuffled them in. You just can kind of go for a mass mill as a follow-up to this.
Yeah, I think this card is really, really sweet, like the design of it. The very thing that, like, the very first thing I thought of was that Mogu Cultist, but as soon as Roffle started talking about the card, the possibilities, guys, they just open up. It is kind of cool, even like in a sticky situation, this can be like a tutor, right? It's like a tutor from your deck if you really need to find something. But no, really, really cool design. I'm sure there's a lot of really creative stuff you can do with Rogue with this. And yeah, I think the Pogo thing, I mean, that'll be a fun thing to view, just like vomiting out 7 Pogos on turn 7 after playing this on 6.
Even some of your lackeys, like Kobold Lackey, you wouldn't mind getting a handful of deals damage to the opponent's face. You could use that in conjunction with Togwaggle, and even put Togwaggles back into your deck, and then start drawing, the rest of your deck. I guess that's a little bit aggressive for because you're going to fill your hand with 6 mana cards. But I think the lackeys would be, something that would fit right into that as well.
Yeah, I think one of the really underrated parts of this card, like when I initially read it, I thought it was like cards that you had shuffled into your deck, but the fact that it just discovers a card in your deck. Obviously, if you've shuffled more than one copy, it's more likely you find it off the discover, but
right. And that is another thing that was confirmed by the Hearthstone team, because that was something that we'd all kind of assumed for a while, but I think this is the first time that we've gotten like proper confirmation on that. So that's another benefit to this card, is that it, like things like Shadow Visions, when it's checking your deck, it actually is looking at the number of copies of the cards.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I played back at the end of, what was the last expansion last year? Descent of Dragons, something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. I played a Shuffle Rogue with Faldori Striders, Stowaways, and like Waxadread, and that deck was a ton of fun. It wasn't like super good because it was like a tempo rogue, but I think this deck obviously like goes in that deck with the new 3 mana card that shuffles the Spooky Bears into your deck. So I think I'm just gonna you got Mogu Cultist, you've got Pogo Hoppers, you just got like spiders, like draw all the spiders, fill your board of 4/4s, draw 4 cards. Seems pretty insane for six mana. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so it's one of those cards that just opens up possibilities, which is what I like about it. And at that, you're only giving up 1 stat for, obviously 6 mana is a hefty price in Wild, and you're often dead by then. But the fact that in the matchups where it's good, which is against value or late game decks, you're not that upset if you whiff on it, just playing it on curve, because it's still a 6 mana 5/7
for sure.
A lot of times those types of effects come with pretty embarrassing stat lines. So
yeah, I mean, just comparing this to Tack, and I'm like, damn.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. So one of the cards that really caught my eye immediately was Petting Zoo. We've been talking so much. It feels like this entire expansion of, I mean, let's be honest, for like years at this stage of what can push Hunter, what does Hunter need in Wild? And I think this is the type of card that can really actually push a kind of viable Hunter archetype for Wild. Because like Petting Zoo is obviously at a baseline, it's playable, right? Like in a pinch, if you need to have it as a 3/3 on curve, that's fine. But the upside is absolutely ridiculous. When we're talking about things like Cloaked Huntress and getting out multiple secrets, even if we're talking about a curve of Mad Scientist into this, it really means that we're getting multiple 3/3s on board on 3. And that's the kind of early game swing and domination that Wild Hunter decks really have needed. I'm very excited about this card in pushing that kind of direction, because Secret Hunter was a deck that I used to play a lot back when Karazhan, I think, first came out, and we were playing like Barnes and Cloaked Huntress and Bragg and all that kind of stuff in Standard. So yeah, I really like this card and the direction it should push. It's not that creative in terms of what it's trying to do, right? It's not opening up a world of possibilities in the same way the Rogue cards were, but I really like this and what it can do for the class. So yeah, I'm happy to try this out day one.
Yeah, I mean, this is Spellstone 3 and 4 for Secret Hunter, and Spellstone is like kind of just a nutty card in general when you think about it. I like you, I'm really excited to mess around with Secret Hunter, because it's always felt like Secret Hunter is a deck on the fringe of being really good. Yeah. And it just like, if you don't, if you lose the board on turn 3, turn 4, then your Spellstone's not super impactful, and this makes that a lot less likely to happen. And so I'm really excited to mess around with some Secret Hunter too.
Yeah, I think the comparison to Spellstone is apt, not just because of the effect that it has, but because it's just kind of an okay card on its own. You don't need a whole lot to make it useful. You can ramp up the Spellstone even once, or even, now that it's again back at 5 mana, playing a 5 mana 6/6 is just fine. Whereas same thing here, a 3 mana 3/3, you're not excited about it, but if you have even one secret on the board, it suddenly becomes much better. So yeah, like it's kind of the opposite of the what I mentioned about ETC, where you don't have to set anything up necessarily. You're just playing your cards, and so I think it'll undoubtedly be a successful card because of that. I just don't know if Secret Hunter will be strong enough to make it see a whole lot of play.
Yeah, I mean,
that'll be the limiting factor.
Yeah, Hunter needs a lot of help, right? And I don't know if Petting Zoo itself is enough to get it there, but it's a big step in the right direction. Give me a couple more cards like Petting Zoo, and Hunter will be like tier 1, maybe tier 2.
Yeah, I can get behind that. Yeah, it's a great step for Hunter, and it's a couple more cards, and then we'll really be talking. But yeah, the other one that really caught my eye was actually Revenant Rascal. So the 3 mana 3/3 Warlock minion, Battlecry, destroy your mana crystal for both players. This card I think I don't even quite know how to evaluate it. Like, I can't tell whether I think it's really good or if it's just like unplayable, but it really did catch my eye. There's a couple things that I like about it that make me optimistic. The first is that the player effectively gets like initiative, right? Where they get to play a 3/3 and then the opponent goes back down to their 2 mana. So they kind of like skip the mana curve a little bit. It's also really good specifically with Warlock, because Warlock has a lot of ways to do very, very powerful things with very limited amount of mana. Whether we're talking, I mean, the very first thing that jumps out at that is Darkglare Warlock, right? Darkglare Warlock can push out an immense amount of stats at a very low mana cost because of Molten Giant and Flesh Giant coming down for 0. And keeping the game basically within those lower mana thresholds is very, I think, beneficial for the deck. It wipes out things like, Mass Hysteria, right? Like if you pair a couple giants with this on 4, your opponent's limited, to a very small amount of potential clears. So yeah, this card, I don't know exactly like where it would fit or exactly like whether it'll be good enough, but it caught my eye. It's a weird effect. Not sure why it's not a demon. We talked about this pre-show, but a little bit confusing on that one, but the fact that it's not a demon actually is probably very beneficial for it in Wild Warlock decks. But yeah, what do you guys think?
I think that what you mentioned about getting the benefit of or destroying the mana crystal on your turn after you've made a play for it is relevant. We saw that it's kind of like the Cult Neophyte to Lotheb is this to Zihi kind of thing, and we saw that in some even decks early on when Zihi was released, where you could get the benefit of a 10 mana turn and then limit your opponent's turn to 6 mana. But the downside here, or the downside there, was that you're still getting to that 10 mana point, or you're still like getting to that 6 mana point. Here you can have that come out much earlier, where the limited effect is maybe more impactful in the early game for a deck like Darkglare Warlock. So you could definitely see it having potential.
Yeah, I same thing. I saw the card and I immediately thought Darkglare Warlock, right? Because I don't really see how Cube Lock or Arena Lock style decks can abuse this card too heavily. But I'm looking at Darkglare, and you have Cult Neophyte in that deck already to delay AoE turns, or just try to delay so that you can hit with your giants. And I mean, this is one more mana, right? But you're doing so much mana cheating with Darkglare, and you put down this card, and it buys you not only like one turn, but it potentially buys you like two, because it puts your opponent behind mana crystals. And so I think, honestly, I'm looking at it just kind of replacing Cult Neophyte, in my opinion. Like in those Darkglare Warlock decks, I could totally see that happening, and it's going to be so annoying to play against. Like I can already like foresee all the frustrations that I'm going to have. I'm like, all right, I've got the Master's Area, we'll be fine. And then they play this, and you just
exactly. It just throws off the plans for the opponent's answers, especially. You mentioned Master's Area against Priests. They go fishing for it off of Shadow Visions. They feel that means they wasted the 2 mana the turn prior to that, and now they're not going to get that clear off of it anyway. So it's a pretty feels bad, man.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not excited for that in Darkglare. All right, but my two cards that I'm excited about, I think the first one was Occult Conjurer. This is the 4-mana 4/4 mage card, where if you control a secret, you get 2 4/4, so basically a 4-mana 8/8. And the reason I was excited for this card was Secret Mage was probably my favorite deck for a long time in Wild. I know Roffle and I talked about this a long time ago, where we saw Alanath being released in Kobolds and Catacombs. We were both like super excited because we were big fans of like the Burn Mage, like aggro freeze mage style of decks. And so Secret Mage like has always had 4-drop as its like weak point, right? You have Kirin Tor, and then you're kind of just like, hopefully I discounted my Crystal Runner, otherwise my turn 4 sucks.
I mean, you're looking for double 2, really,
Yeah.
is what it comes down to right now, and that doesn't feel great either.
Yeah, but now you kind of remedy that by getting a 4-mana 8/8 on turn 4, which is kind of insane. I don't really know what you're taking out. My instincts for like either Arcane Mysteries, but Arcane Mysteries kind of help set this up, so probably not Arcane Mysteries. Maybe just like Fireballs from the deck, to be honest with you.
That was going to be my question about it, because I definitely saw this as a good card, kind of a return to the Secret Mage used to play a little bit differently before Alunith, where it was, at least for the first 5 to 6 turns, it was a minion based deck where you're just trying to lock out the board and get some chip damage in before going burn over the top. You tend to lean towards that burn game plan a little bit quicker with Alunith now, because you have the capacity to set an ice block and just send everything face. So it's a little bit different now. My concern was that, like, with the way that decks are built now, with Polkelt to ensure the Alunith draw, if you hit Polkelt on curve or into the Alunith, this kind of throws off that burn game plan a little bit. So do you just change the construction of the deck? Do you look towards maybe a more minion-based combat in the early game, and then things like Voracious Reader instead? People have been playing around with that anyway. I don't think we are at a point where that was good, but if you're taking out the Polkelt now so that you're not drawing the Alunith as consistently, and relying on more early game minion combat, can you get away with that type of thing now? I don't know, but it's nice to actually have to think about it. And also you get the rigged fair game as well for some additional card draw, so maybe you need Alunith less, which is an absurd thing to think about. But is there a possibility for shifting the archetype up a little bit, and maybe those 2 cards, you can make an argument for that? And it's possible that I'm way off base here and Alunith is still just going to be Alunith, but an interesting consideration.
Yeah, I expect that Alunith will still be Alunith. I think like the weakest card slots that we'll be looking at are the Ancient Mysteries that Meowth talked about. But like Roffle said, rigged fair game, I think that alleviates some issues with card draw when we talk about cutting the Ancient Mysteries and kind of giving the Secret Mage a lot more options. So I think that'll be a popular inclusion as a one-of. And I think the 4/4 here, or the 8/8, I think that'll just easily slot in and really shore up kind of that weak turn that Secret Mage is kind of used to. I doubt we cut Fireball. I think with Polkat and Alunith, it makes a lot of sense to still keep those in the deck. So I think for me, it seems like a relatively easy change. And we'll see though.
Yeah, and I think with the rigged fair game, I think that has potentially some interesting interactions with Ice Block too that would make you not necessarily want to cut fireballs, where you could, if you're able to have the Ice Block popped at a low life total because if you get one hit with an Ice Block, you're not taking damage that turn, that procs, and then you want to hit your burn to finish the opponent off. So I think cutting Ice Block cutting Fireball might be maybe not the route to go, but there are very few open slots in Secret Mage, I guess, is the concern.
The whole reason I'm really excited about this is I think it's a really good card, and Secret Mage has been the same deck for basically 2.5 years, right? And actually having to think about how we actually construct the deck, I think is really, really cool and a lot of fun.
I mean, when was the last time cutting a Lunith was even a discussion? That was what made the deck go for a long time. So as crazy as I probably am for even mentioning it,
a little bit crazy.
At least it's a discussion now, right?
Just a little bit crazy. It's okay. And then the other card that I'm really excited about is Ringmaster Watley, and then I guess we can go ahead and talk about his baton as well, the weapon, where he's a 5-mana 3/5. He's basically a curator or a Countess Ashmore, where he draws a mech, a dragon. What's the other one? Mech dragon.
Pirate.
Mech dragon pirate.
Sorry, I forgot about it.
That's the important one.
Yeah. That's true. The most important one. Basically, he's a 5-mana curator, draws those 3 cards, and then the baton buffs those 3 tribes. And the reason I was super excited about it is because I've been like super down on Galakrond Warrior for a long time. I think every time we see a Chinese meta report come out, like it has Galakrond in like tier 1, tier 2 deck, and I'm just like, no, this deck sucks. It's so bad. But it actually is getting a ton more draw, and it's getting a lot more ways to fight for tempo in the early mid game because of the just amount of stats that you can get off a baton. Like every swing of the baton's potentially +3/+3, right? Which is kind of insane. And the one attack doesn't really matter too much when you're running a Galakrond shell because you have the ability to buff the attack. So I mean, I'm just excited to play revamped Galakrond Warrior and actually like play like a tempo deck, which I'm super excited about. And like you're not having to shove in garbage cards like you were in Ashmore, right? Just because there weren't a ton of really good rush minions or a ton of good lifesteal minions outside of Ziliax. And now you have a good mech in Ziliax, you have good dragons in Scion, and you have Risky Skipper, like the best pirate ever created. So, I mean, Watley, I feel like just is a perfect slot in when it comes to Galakrond Warrior in general. And maybe just like tempo Dragon Warriors moving forward, I think.
Yeah, you're not sacrificing anything, just sliding them in because you're running a mech, dragon, and pirate. You're at least one of each of those already, so you don't have to give up a lot to hit his requirements in Galakrond specifically. I think compared to Curator as well, he's coming out a lot earlier, so that makes him more relevant. And then with you're obviously giving up a lot of stats in a tempo deck anyway, but Galakrond Warrior already kind of does that to make sure that it has you're basically giving up stats that turn for follow-up turns with the minions that you draw, and potentially buff with the baton, so you can set a baton into him as well, which is pretty nice. The baton, as you mentioned, probably slides in there as well, just because it's pretty light on turn 2 anyway. Playing Galakrond Warrior, in my experience, feels really bad if you don't draw the invoke weapon on turn 2 already. So having some redundancy there might be nice, even if you're not necessarily attacking with it right off the bat. At least you're allocating mana to something that isn't your hero power, because your hero power is pretty irrelevant in Galakrond Warrior. So I could see that being the case. But yeah, like you, I've been kind of skeptical of the Galakrond Warriors in the past, just because it always felt like a worse pirate warrior. But maybe things will change with the stronger mid to late game that this gives it.
Okay, so those are the cards that we, are most excited to play. But since this is probably going to be our last episode talking about Scholomance Academy, I just wanted to take a little bit of time and talk to Roffle and Corbett about, looking back and reflecting on Scholomance Academy. And so, talking about just the general overall power level of the expansion. Was it, in me personally, I know Corbett and I talked a little bit about this last week, but I think we both were in agreement this is the best expansion Hearthstone's ever had. At least in recent memory. I don't know if you feel the same, Raffle.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I enjoyed the Year of the Dragon sets. I thought they're fine. I had a lot of fun with them, but I don't know. This had real almost Kobolds and Catacombs, Knights of the Frozen Throne vibes, where it was undoubtedly powerful, but I don't know, still in a fun way for me, at least. Like the cards that were clearly strong still felt good to play, I guess is what it comes down to, with obviously with a few exceptions, but I don't know, that it didn't feel as bad as some of those other expansions. And it's the fact that we were going through the list earlier, trying to pick out favorite cards, and it was difficult to do so because so many cards are relevant at this stage in the wild format, says a lot about the power level of the expansion. I don't know if that should necessarily always be the case for an expansion, but it's nice to kind of inject some new life into the wild format.
Yeah, it very much felt like we were talking about the set was obviously intentionally powerful, I think, where they did that, and I think in a deliberate way. And I think that also coincides a lot with the balancing philosophy that they've had, right? Where when they nerfed Secret Passage, the quote that we got was, it wasn't a matter of if, it was just a matter of when we were going to nerf it. And the fact that they're kind of very willing to make changes, I think that's like a big part of why the set was overall very strong, because they were fine making any adjustments necessary. But yeah, the set was really, really great. Like you said, with KNC, it gave that kind of very similar vibe where it was like 60, 70, 80 cards deep, right? And that's the same thing. The biggest thing about Kobolds was just how many cards were strong. But I think the difference between this and Kobolds is that I don't see as many long-term problems from this set. Kobolds was built around like the recruit mechanic, which was kind of inherently a little scary. This set, to me, like you said, a lot of the cards just feel fun, right? Even the cards that are very, very strong, they don't necessarily feel bad to lose to or bad to play. Like I said, with a few exceptions, we saw Guardian Animals nerfed, for example. But yeah, this is definitely my favorite set in probably ever. Like I loved it, but I've talked about that so much. So yeah, over the podcasting, but yeah.
I wonder if our perception of like maybe the relative strength to previous expansions is the fact that there are balance changes to shore up some of those. If we had 5-card Secret Passage for the entire set, or 7 mana Guardian Animals like we would have in the past, would we be looking back so fondly on it?
That's very true. Yeah,
I don't know, but they're deceptively, they're powerful cards that feel deceptively fair, I think is what it is. And I think some of that is that it's a card like Broom, for instance, or Tour Guide, where on its face it's not doing a whole lot, but what it's doing enables so much.
Yeah, we were looking at it, and I think there's 40 cards that we'll see play at least for the next couple years, but I can't tell you a single one of them that I'm like, I need this nerfed right now. Right, I can't really put my finger on one specific card that's broken.
And even many of those that I would, it's more about the interaction of cards that already existed than it is about that particular card. Like there's nothing inherently broken about that card. It's their interaction with other cards that makes it concerning.
Yeah, and I want to go ahead and say that the dual class kind of shtick, the thing for Scholomance Academy, I think it was very well done. I was a big fan of the dual class cards. I hope they bring it back in some capacity moving forward, even if it's just like one dual class card for like,
especially when you compare it to the tri-class cards from Gadget Sand. Like this is just it was more flavorful. The cards were more fun. They were more playable. Like everything about it was just better than the implementation of the tri-class cards. Like there wasn't the confusion. Like I still get people asking me why is Azakas in your deck when I'm playing Reno Hunter. So it's like there's so much about the dual class cards that I loved personally. So
before the expansion came out, I was so nervous about dual class cards, and my big concern was like, oh, how are you going to balance them? Like we've seen tri-class before, and that wasn't great, and I was just completely wrong. Like I thought it would make it more difficult to balance the game and stuff, but instead it just opened up a lot of options, right? It didn't feel like the classes were separated in the way that tri-classes were, and instead it just gave a lot more overlap and a lot more options and kind of a lot more possibilities with each class having more access to more stuff. So yeah, big success, I think.
Right. I think you hit it on the head there. That it was because it was about the overlap that it was easier to balance and felt just generally better from a flavor standpoint, because when you contrast it again to the tri-class cards, they make sense, and they're using mechanics that already exist within classes much of the time.
Yeah, I'm looking at most of my favorite cards were dual class cards, just because the flavor that the overlap enabled was like, it was a lot of fun. But let's kind of dive in. So let's talk about, what are your favorite cards from Scholomance Academy? If you had to pick two, what would they be?
So the two that YouTube comments usually tell me are Animated Broomstick and Polkeld, because apparently I add those cards to just about every single deck I make. But the cards that I actually enjoyed playing with the most, first of all, is True Aim Crescent. I think this card was just really interesting in that I think it was the exemplar of what a dual class card is for me, where it allows you to very aggressively push face with your minions, which is something that both Hunter and Demon Hunter have a tendency to do, and then use your face to kind of leverage that board state into removal for the opposing minions, or even manage your trades a little creatively so that you can get value trades based on the board state. I thought it was just a really interesting card, and it enabled Knuckles Hunter for me, which is a favorite deck of mine. So I mean, any card that gives tools to that deck is a win in my book. But I think it was just a really interesting card. Like it had so many creative uses, breaking eggs. Like it did so much, and I think it was just a really cool card in both classes. The second one is Infiltrator Lillian, and it's not just for the voice line of her summon, but I think it was just kind of a card that flew a bit under the radar. I really liked the stealth archetype from the previous expansion. Greyheart Sage is one of my favorite cards. 3 mana, draw 2, and make a minion. Like I love that card. And this kind of plays in with that. I also had a lot of fun with this very recently in a Death Rattle Rogue deck where you play Anka and then cube your Lillians to get kind of a wave of burst at your opponent. So I think it's just an interesting card. And I mean, the voice line certainly helps, if I'm being honest.
Can you do something great for the podcast and imitate the voice line, please?
I don't want to blow out people's earballs, so or specifically yours or Corbett. So
it's okay. Unlucky. I tried, guys. I tried.
Yeah, there was an attempt. But yeah, this whole set was great. So it was kind of really hard to narrow down exactly what I was going to pick as my favorite. But apparently I just like calling people losers too much, because Penflinger was absolutely my favorite card, I think, out of the entire expansion. As toxic as it is, as much as people hate it and wish they could squelch a card for the first time ever, Penflinger was so sweet, dude. Penflinger was so interesting in a variety of classes. I loved it and what it did for Libram Paladin specifically. Where the pure Paladin build felt very kind of on curve. It felt very Paladin in that there wasn't necessarily a ton of cards being played each turn. It was kind of just doing your thing. But when LeBroom Paladin came out with the Penflinger, I was all over that. It gave Paladin like a very different feel and more like rogue type mechanic, I think, with the Penflinger and Libram of Wisdom. And that's the kind of like style that I like. And it was probably my favorite Paladin deck that I'd played maybe ever, like at least for a couple of years. And I think Penflinger in general was just it was very interesting and and it was effective in multiple decks without necessarily feeling completely broken. It pushed Dark Lair a bit. It was able to push Soul Demon Hunter in Standard. It was very effective in Priest, but it was just kind of simple and strong, and I kind of liked it, which is, and I just like the play pattern a lot, playing a lot of stuff, doing damage to the face, controlling board. That's all like things that are very much up my alley. So yeah, I loved Penflinger.
Being toxic, right up your alley. Agreed.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that last part. But yes,
yeah, talk about an A+ voice line. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if they will ever get that muting on a minion before. I don't know. People are very ticked off about the Penflinger, but yeah, in the other one, you know, like I picked one mana 1/1, so let's go with the other animated broomstick. Again, like it's very much like Penflinger. It was so sort of subtle in how incredibly strong it was, where you kind of take a glance at it and it might kind of go a little bit under the radar. But Broomstick was really great. Again, it opens up a lot in Wild specifically, where often, even Wild, if you don't have the ability to kind of swing the board on your sweet turn, you're just dead, right? Like, it doesn't matter what like cool thing you're trying to do, the opponent just goes face and you're dead. So I think Broomstick was really sweet in that it offered a lot of counterplay. I think it made the Darkglare Mirrors a lot more interesting, right? Like, where if Darkglare Mirrors were purely about whoever vomited 8/8s first, that would have been like one of the most horrific matchups that had ever existed in Hearthstone. The fact that there was actual counterplay made it really sweet. I think it opened up a whole bunch of decisions and was just like a really, really cool, sweet card in general that, you know, fit into a lot of decks and still might fit into a ton of decks moving forward.
Two cards that kind of embody what we talked about of the set in general, where they're kind of subtly very powerful cards.
Yeah. I still remember from like when I was doing card reviews back before Scholomance Academy came out. These were two that I was like, yeah, they're okay, but I can't ever see them seeing play in Wild, and like completely, totally underrated these guys and the potential power they had. Just because like not only are they like strong cards on their own, but the fact that they enhance everything else that you're doing in your deck, I think is a huge deal. One mana cards are very good.
Yeah, they feel like really, really good support pieces, right? Where they don't necessarily they're not like the foundation of the deck, but they can both do so much in a variety of different lists and just like help out a ton of different archetypes.
Yeah, and then my two favorite cards. So the first one, for any of y'all that know me, deep down in my heart, I love me some really greedy, grindy control value decks. I love them. And so to me, that's when I saw Potion of Illusion, that's what immediately jumped to my mind. Right, just because I love to do like the brand Kazakis Zola or the brand Nosferatu Zola Barista kind of plays when it came to Arena Lock and Arena Priest, and I saw this and I was like, it's just another thing for me to play. And the fact that it brought up a whole new archetype on its own in Turtle Mage, as much as people might have hated that deck, I think it was a really cool deck, and I think this is still a really, really cool card. And I mean, the fact, for me, LPG Mage is like one of my favorite decks of all time now, and just looping Battle Cries and getting a ton of value. This is just right up my alley and one of my favorite cards of all time. I don't know how you guys felt about it. I don't know if it was too degenerate at some points, but I'm a big fan of Potion of Illusion for sure.
I think what it did for Luna's Pocket Galaxy Mage in particular is what I enjoyed about it. Turtle Mage was interesting the first few days of playing it, but I understand why people were calling for nerfs. It was kind of a frustrating deck to go up against. It was novel, so I enjoyed it. Like I like newness and different game plans. I think there's deceptively a lot to manage in terms of how many minions you have on board. But I think the card in general was Potion of Illusion is very cool, even if it did enable that type of thing. And in particular, the sort of that mini combo it gave you in Luna's Pocket Galaxy Reno Mage was one of my favorite decks early on in the expansion for sure.
And then my last, I guess not my last, but my second favorite card that I had to choose, I picked Lord Barov. Lord Barov was another card that I think flew under a lot of people's radar during reveal season, but it ended up being kind of like the savior of Wild during the Darkglare days. Like the ability of this in Risk Escaper to immediately clear a board, like we were talking about last week, it felt like the last piece of this super powerful warrior core now, right? With Ankar, Risky Skipper, Armor Smith, Battle Rage, and now Barov. So first of all, I think it's just a really, really cool card. The fact that it's really good in Paladin as well. Libram Paladin really likes this card. And now finally Warrior, after being like at the bottom for so long, now actually finally has its core together moving forward. I was a big fan of Lord Barov. Even though I'm not a huge Warrior player, I love the core of Risky Skipper Inkar Battle Rage. It's a really cool package. And I'm really happy that Lord Barov got printed.
Yeah, it just does so much, right, for what it costs. And it's so generally flexible and kind of can fit into different situations. Whether you have like a broomstick to pair with it as an immediate clear, whether you have like Risky Skipper, whether, you know, you play Skipper then Barrow versus playing Barrow then Skipper. It's just very flexible in what it's trying to do. And yeah, it's just like a really sweet card as like an AoE option as a single target removal. Incredibly strong. Like this will be, I think, an absolute mainstay, like you're saying, in Warrior and Paladin decks for a very long time. But yeah, I think Barrow was generally a very positive thing for Wilds as a whole this past expansion.
And then kind of building off of that, so let's talk about favorite decks or archetypes from this expansion. So outside of Darkglare Warlock, right? Because if you call it your favorite, I'm going to just kick you from the show right now. But do I need to find a new co-host, Corbett? Is that what you're about to tell me?
I'll let Roffle go first. Yeah.
All right. Well, I already mentioned the LPG mage, but I kind of stole that list at least from you, so I feel like it would be unfair for me to also steal the that as my choice for you. So I'll go with Odd Mage. I think that was something that got a fair amount of support. There are a few different ways that you could go about building that. Firebrand was in some ways better than Flamewaker in that deck because you were able to ensure that those missiles were hitting minions, giving your minions the freedom to go face and get repetitive damage rather than just cross your fingers. And you're also running typically a lower spell density in that deck because of the lack of Sorcerer's Apprentice and you can't necessarily stack a whole bunch of spells. So I thought Firebrand was an interesting inclusion. In addition to the 1-mana spells and Flamewaker, as well as Lab Partner, and even Raz and Jandis really kind of helped make that deck feel relevant. With you also had Tour Guide to give yourself a free, sometimes 4-mana hero power to get that Jan'alai online quicker. So it's not necessarily a top tier deck, but it did get a whole lot of support from the Scholomance Academy. So that was what came to mind.
I kind of forgot about Odd Mage, but like that and Odd Shaman got like huge buffs, right? I completely forgot about Raz, but like Lab Partner, Tour Guide, I did enjoy playing Odd Mage a lot. You're right, it got a lot better this expansion. Big fan.
The one that jumps out to me immediately is probably pre-nerf Kingsbane Rogue. Kingsbane Rogue is one of my favorite archetypes ever. And yeah, it got a massive boost. It got a complete revival with Cutting Class and Secret Passage. I think I'm not forgetting any extra cards that it got. But yeah, I had a ton of fun with this one before the change. Mostly played it when I was suffering through the Darkglare and Arena Priest meta. Kingsbane was kind of my savior and something that I was playing a ton of. Post nerf, it hasn't really held up perfectly, where the meta's become a little bit too hostile for it, and the nerf does like feel a little bit bad. But yeah, I had a ton of fun with Kingsbane. The other one that really jumps out actually is Darkglare Warlock, where I didn't know if I should actually say it, but yeah, Darkglare Warlock is right up my alley in terms of the type of archetype that I enjoy. Where it's doing very degenerate combo-y things, it's drawing a lot of cards, it's playing a lot of cards. Similar to kind of how I enjoyed Quest Mage and Sniplock. Again, I totally fine with it being nerfed. It deserved to be gutted. Although we're finding out later that it didn't necessarily get as hurt as we might have thought. But yeah, Darkglare Warlock, one of my favorites from the expansion as well, I think.
For those of you that are listening, I'm now taking applications for a new co-host. So feel free to let me know in the YouTube comments if you guys like.
Understandable.
But for me, I think there's a lot of decks that got a ton of buffs from this expansion, like Libram Paladin, Odd Rogue. I really enjoyed like the pre-Guardian Animals nerf Jade Druid. I really like the proactive Jade Druid, but I definitely have to say LPG Mage is my favorite. Because like I was talking about Potion of Illusion, but the whole Turtle Mage, Cloud Prince, like Infinite Kill or Lotha block you out, or just the pure value and tempo you can get out of copying like a Jandis was just a ton of fun to play. I'm pretty sure I had over 1,000 games on LPG Mage, like just this expansion, because like for the last month and a half, it's been like the only deck that I've really enjoyed playing. It's been a ton of fun, and just because like you can play, like there's only like 20 like core cards, I feel like in LPG Mage, and you can kind of flex depending on what you're playing against, which makes it a lot of fun to constantly be building and messing around with. Plus, there was a ton of highlights with like Solarian and just the sheer amounts of like damage and burst that you can do. It's been a lot of fun to play.
Yeah, the flexibility not only in the builds of the deck, but also the lines that you take with the deck once you queue up a game is really what attracted me to it. And then honestly, I played that deck probably more than just nearly any other this previous expansion myself, as certainly more than any other meta deck that was released. So yeah, I could definitely see the appeal just in the flexibility, the variety of the gameplay involved.
Yeah, every game felt different, so it was a lot of fun. All right, and our last little segment on our trip down Scholomance Academy memory lane, let's talk about the most overrated cards from our Twitch chats. All right, so these are the cards that when they were revealed during Scholomance Academy, people in our Twitch chats thought were going to be absolutely game-breaking. They were going to ruin the WoW format, or they were going to be seeing play in every deck. And I think the most obvious example was Glide and Stelina, the amount of people that were freaking out about these cards. And I think they seem like 1% play, if that, in Wild.
Yeah, I mean, you say that in the past tense, but it was a few weeks ago just now that I posted a deck running the absurd Glide Keymaster Alabaster combo. Obviously not good. And I still had people in the comment section saying, well, it's 4 mana, draw 4. Of course Glide is good. And and that's just not what the card says. So I think that people's sort of early response to that has still tainted people's response to it. It's a bad card. And like, I didn't necessarily think it was going to fall this flat, but if the card said 4 mana, draw 4, yes, it would be good, but that's not what it says. And the fact that you have to dump your hand in its entirety before you can get that effect and the fact that the outcast turns out not terribly relevant in situations where you've already dumped your hand. It's just not a good card. That's especially when you compare it to something like Skull, where you're more happy to dump your card, or you're more happy to dump your hand, or even not, in order to draw 3 cards off a Skull and reduce their cost with the outcast than you are to manipulate your opponent's hand and block their combo. Because if you need to set something up in Wild to block an opponent's combo, you're just not going to block that combo. They're too fast.
Yeah, I think Glide. Now there have been a lot of people. Community as a whole have been very wrong about. I think Glide for me is probably the funniest one because people freaked the hell out. Like there were Twitter posts saying they were rage quitting, like don't give Blizzard any more of your money. I can't believe I pre-ordered the expansion. This isn't even a joke. Like people said this stuff. And it was terrible. Like I'm going through old Discord messages. I'm trying to find the receipts that I was low on this card the moment I saw it. Because to me, I always was a little confused why people were so like gung-ho on this being absolutely busted and it's going to destroy the game. And I don't know. It's a bad card. I think people completely I don't know whether it was the draw 4 for 4 or the fact that it interacted with the opponent, but something about this scared everybody.
I think it was the combination of those two things, but the reality is that you don't get those two things together in most situations.
Yeah. I think if you had like an actual aggressive Demon Hunter deck that wasn't odd, right? If you had a Pirate Demon Hunter that was super low to the ground, and you ran Voracious Readers, then maybe Glide could see play as a bad Divine Favor.
Yeah, but I think even then you're just like, I have Voracious Reader, so I'm happy with that.
Yeah, honestly,
exactly. That's the card that people should have been mad about, and even then, it's just kind of fine.
Yeah. Another card that people were obviously completely pissed off about was Lightning Bloom. Oh my god, I can't believe you can just reprint Innovate like that. That's unbelievable. It's going to be the most broken thing. No. Lightning Bloom was quite effective in the decks where it was suited to be effective, right? So it's very good in decks that like have one powerful swing turn, or like once you get to this turn and this like thing that you want to do, you're incredibly favored. So an example would be Big Shaman, right? Like once the Big Shaman cheats out the Yashaj, well, they're probably going to win. They don't need to worry about the overload. They just need to get to that point. It's very good in Malagos Druid, where once you Malagos combo, well, there's no more overload, so who cares?
Well, no more Hearthstone either.
Yeah, there's no more Hearthstone. So in those decks, it's actually very effective, but people were freaking out about this and everything. Aggro Shaman, in Aggro Druid, even Shaman. And it was just terrible in like a lot of these decks that actually needed to play the game out after you overloaded for 2 mana.
For what it's worth, it was actually really good in Aggro Shaman, but...
I was thinking more like a Kirby, but yes, I guess it was Spirit of the Shark or Spirit of the Frog?
Yeah.
Frog. Okay. But you get my point on even Shaman, I suppose.
I think this card is one for me that really shows the duality of Twitch chat, because it was maybe a few weeks before the expansion was even announced. People were still in my chat saying they really need to unnerf Innervate. I think it would be fine in Wild, especially. Just rotate it in. The minute this was announced, I had another group of people that were coming in saying, I can't believe they reprinted old Innervate. I'm quitting Hearthstone. And again, that's not what the card says. Innervate was good at 2 mana because it was played in every Druid deck, because it didn't read Overload 2. So even if you had turns where you need a follow-up, you still benefit from the massive tempo gain of free 2 mana. Mm-hmm. So things like Aggro Druid wanted to play it, any Druid deck wanted to play it, but if your deck relies on winning the early game, you innervate on turn 1 and fall flat on 2, your opponent's going to have an opportunity to swing back that board at some point, and you're just going to really miss having a turn 2. So
yeah, I think that's why it ended up just being cut from Aggro Druids. I don't think the Overload even Shamans ever took off, right?
Right.
We're not saying Lightning Bloom is a bad card. Don't get us wrong. I think Lightning Bloom is a very, very good card in the right kind of deck, like Corbett was mentioning, but it's not the thing that's ruining Hearthstone like a lot of people thought it was going to be.
And just like Light isn't 4 mana draw 4, or Lightning Bloom isn't unnerfed Innervate. Like, there are consequences to these cards. There is other additional text on these cards as well.
And then the last one I want to talk about is Sphere of Sapience. So this is a card that I was pretty high on coming into Scholomance Academy, just because I thought it was going to be very good in combo decks or decks where filtering your draw mattered. So stuff like Turtle Mage, I actually really enjoyed this. I thought it was going to be really good in Reno Priest, right? Trying to find your Pokelts as soon as possible. And it's okay in those decks, but it's not nearly as auto-include as I thought it was going to be. So this one is just one that I wanted to bring up where, I was one of the people that thought it was going to be kind of omnipresent in a lot of decks. Just because its equivalent it was kind of broken in Magic, and this is not Magic, and so it's kind of...
Yeah, I think that with combo decks specifically, they tend to run a lot of card draw anywhere, and
exactly.
And it's more efficient just to brute force your draw to the cards that you need when you have that potential in a deck like Big Shaman or even Big Priest, which nobody's playing right now, but where you're just top decking every turn, you need to make sure that those draws count, because you don't have the luxury of being able to run card draw, and that's where I think Sphere of Sapience is best. But it just turns out that that card slot and that mana that you're allocating to it just isn't necessarily as good as just shoving draw into your deck and cycling cards.
Absolutely. I think there are a couple things where I think there are 3 decks where this is quite effective in Wild, where it was Anyfin Paladin, Turtle Mage, and Big Shaman, and a big part of that is the benefit there for Sphere is that it stops you from drawing bad cards, right? And it's a little bit different than fishing for combo pieces, where Turtle Mage needed to really avoid getting these specific cards. Anything needed to avoid the Murlocs and that kind of thing. The thing with it in Reno Priest is it was a card that you had to keep in the mulligan whenever you're offered it, but it wasn't as good as the other cards that you could have gotten in your mulligan. It's not as good as Zephyr, Raza, or Polkelt, and so it kind of baits people in that sense. It's a fine-ish card, but running it in things like Malagos Druid hasn't proven to be very good. And so, yeah, it's just like an okay card that, again, fits in certain decks. I think very similar to like Lightning Bloom, where it's strong on the right archetype, but isn't as ubiquitous as people might have expected.
Okay, but that's gonna be it for our trip down Scholomance Academy memory lane. I'm gonna miss this expansion. There's a lot of good, there's a lot of ugly, but there's also a lot of good, and I'm really looking forward to what Blizzard brings when it comes to Darkmoon Faire. At least the cards we've already seen have me really excited. But as we move into the last little part of our episode, we don't really have the time, and we don't really want to do decks of the week, given that we're kind of in the last week and a half of the expansion. So we kind of want to leave it on this one kind of, I guess, Q&A, one last Q&A. So Jack, if you guys don't know Jack, he's a fairly regular high legend player, but he posted out this question on Twitter asking for like hot takes, right? Unpopular opinions. And one that really caught my eye was one from Rami, who's a Hearthstone GM for the Americas region. He plays a lot of Wild as well, for those of you guys that don't know. He's currently top 100 Legend Wild. But his take was that the Wild meta is extremely unrefined. There are at least 5 tier 1 to 2 decks that no one has discovered yet because there's not that many good deck builders trying new stuff. And I had an opinion. I didn't respond to this, but I'd like to hear y'all's takes on whether you think this is true or not. All right, let's start with Corbett.
Oh, yeah. Probably start with somebody who's good at the game still.
Yeah. So yeah, I actually did reply to Rami because this definitely caught my eye as well. When someone like that who does dabble in Wild and is a GM makes this kind of statement, it's kind of worth at least listening or entertaining the idea. This is something though that I've heard repeatedly over the years. The idea that Wild has hidden gems left and right, and that it's just the players are too bad to really get to there. And I think there's sort of, I perfectly understand the idea, right? Now, the thing is, in Standard, there's more players, there's better players, there's more refinement going on, there's more data, there's more info, there's more competitive incentive. And that's like also a really big thing, right? Players are very much incentivized in Standard to find the best stuff and win. In Wild, it's always going to be naturally more diverse. People are just a bit more of a casual format, even at the top ranks. But when Rami says something like this, I think that what's more likely is that there are very, very good decks that people know about that are very, very underplayed. So an example to me right now would be aggro Murloc Tip the Scales Paladin. So not the OTK version, but just aggro normal Murloc Paladin. That's a very low play rate. I think it's one of like the top 7, 8, 9 decks in the format. I think it's in that kind of range. And so I think that what happens is that the decks that people play in Wild they don't make sense as much as in Standard, where a lot of stuff goes under the radar, even though it exists. But I don't think that there are necessarily like 5 undiscovered, untouched, unbuilt decks that are secretly out there that are tier 1 and tier 2. But yeah, I think that we've seen this previously with like the Wild Open months, where Standard players have come across, and we've seen a little bit of innovation and stuff, but it hasn't been as drastic where there's been a whole bunch of untapped gems. And I think for Wild specifically, the point about good deck builders not trying stuff there's not enough. I think that there's an element of truth to that, and some players have a disproportionate influence over the meta in terms of if they tweet out a list, people will play it. But I think that overall, Wild's power level is so high that it's such a high benchmark for stuff to be good that it becomes very apparent, and stuff goes into existing shells and it's hard to miss them. So that's kind of just my thoughts on it. What do you guys think?
I mean, my 2 cents, when he says there are at least 5 tier 1 to 2 decks that no one's discovered, I would argue that statement should be there are at least like 5 tier 2 decks that no one's discovered, because nobody's that, like, we're not that bad. Like, I know Wild players aren't at the level of Standard players, but we're not that bad. Like, we're not that dumb that we completely miss tier 1 decks. I think what happens is, because the tier 1 decks, like Voidcaller, Voidlord is such a powerful synergy, right? Raza Anduin is such a powerful synergy that it's really hard to break into that tier 1. So there's a bunch of unrefined, like the Murloc Paladin, like Reno's Secret Mage, right? There's a ton of unrefined decks out there that have the potential to be tier 2, tier 3 decks, but nobody really attempts to play them because they don't beat, the tier 1. And like, I think, like you said, there are elements, but I think he's kind of oversimplifying, or at least kind of underrepresenting WoW players in general, because there are people out here that are experimenting and playing new things. I just don't think that we're not that bad players or that bad deck builders where we're completely missing like tier 1 decks. So,
and I think that becomes, so this is something that has been true since I was playing competitively, and that's, 3 years ago people were saying the same thing, and like you said, we just didn't see that like there was some refinement maybe when the Wild Open were hosted and standard players moved over. I think it's a little bit hubristic to assume that that there are this many decks, that if only the competitive standards players, or if we had the depth of skill that those players brought over, that those would be uncovered. I don't think it's realistic that many decks would be flying under the radar. Are there a handful that are, like Corbett said, either underplayed or not even assembled? I think it's possible. I think that that could be true even late into or deep into a standard metagame. And I think that things move a little bit slower in Wild. Not only shifts within the meta, but maybe people catch on to decks a little bit slower just because there is a lower population. But I don't think that people just completely miss tier 1 decks. How quickly was like Dark Glare Warlock, for example, put together?
We got a Chinese meta report on the 12th. It was everywhere by the 15th, and I think the expansion came out around the 6th or 7th, so about a week.
Right, and that's almost an entirely new archetype that everybody immediately jumped on as probably an S tier deck, or an S tier deck early in the expansion. So it's not like it's not like the player base is completely inept, and especially now because since I was playing competitively, the Wild player base has grown significantly to where I think what it was in the past where maybe things were missed. The one that comes to mind is the aggro Anyfin list that became really popular in the Wild Open months as a result of some standard players dabbling, and that turned out to be a very good deck. But I think that as the player base grows, it's less likely that there are these hidden decks that are not being uncovered. I think sometimes things get discovered a little bit later. I think the new Anyfin deck was maybe an example of that, where it turned out to be a very good deck. It was completely overlooked for a few months, but eventually people got there, and that's the result of having numbers. And so I don't think it's completely wrong, but I don't think it's I think it's overstated in that he's actively claiming that there are at least 5 tier 1 to 2 decks. I think it's possible there's a handful that players miss, but I don't think it's that many. There are a lot, and there are a lot more quality players in Wild right now than when I was getting top finishes. It's just the reality of having more people playing the format.
I think the last, just building off of this point, I think the last time we had a Wild Open a year and a half ago, I think the big kind of fallout from a lot of these standard players coming over to Wild was this aggro Anyfin Paladin, right? Where I wouldn't say it wasn't a thing, but I think it got refined. It was a deck, and then it became a top tier deck because of the refinement. And then we got a lot of little adjustments to a lot of the odd Paladin and odd Rogue and even Shaman style of decks. And that was really it. We didn't see anybody busting out brand new archetypes out of nowhere because the Wild players completely missed them. So
one thing that I will say is, and we'll certainly concede to this, is that I do think that the Wild meta is unrefined. But it's not that people are missing decks completely. It's that they're playing unrefined lists. Whether it's again early lists that people haven't caught on that certain cards are bad. Like I still see aggro druids running Lightning Bloom pretty consistently. So I think that it's just the slower trickle of information. But so I would agree with that point, but I don't think it's entire decks. I think it's lists that aren't being properly refined, and maybe that's why we see them or see certain archetypes less frequently, is because people write them off while running unrefined versions.
And there's 2 quick things I just want to jump off what Roffle said, where The thing to remember in Wild is that top legend, I know it's kind of a little bit silly, the idea of talking about top legend at Wild, because for a lot of people, it's relatively accessible, right? It's not that hard for some people to hit top 100 in Wild compared to top whatever in Standard. But the important thing to know is that the metas are very, very different at high legend compared to lower legend in Wild. And this has been very true since about the snip lock days, where snip lock was seeing like 15% of play roughly, if not like more, up to like 25 at very high ranks. And the deck was relatively non-existent at around like rank 5, or it was like just a couple percent of the meta. I think Dark Lair Warlock currently is a deck that is incredibly popular at high ranks, where it was like the deck that every single player was playing on top 5 of every server in the most recent month at one point. But I don't think it trickled down very far. Like, I don't think Dark Lair Warlock is that popular right now at some lower ranks. And so that's also something that people need to remember, is the ranks are very different, and there's a very different experience. And again, like what Roffle said about the unrefined meta as a whole and players playing unrefined stuff or not playing the right stuff, I think that's the biggest thing, right? Where if Reno Priest was a standard deck of equivalent power level, I think it would be like 25, 30% of the meta. I think like Reno Priest would be like even more popular than like Soul Demon Hunter is in Standard. It would be so popular right now. But in Wild, it's a lot closer to even like 15%, 10%. In more of that kind of range, even at very high ranks. And so the Wild player base in general just doesn't seem to actively jump on playing the best stuff, because why would they, right? Like, why would we be as aggressive in going after and playing the exact correct stuff? There's not as much info, and there's a lot less need to, right? We're not fighting for top 16 rank finishes and stuff like that. So yeah, I totally agree with like everything you guys said. I think it raised a lot of good points. And yeah, like I said, I just don't believe in the idea that there are like all these wild powerhouse decks that are missing. Again, because the accessibility of new archetypes to break their way in and become really good, it's so high, right? It's so high to like get over the benchmark of Void Caller, Void Lord, or something like that.
Yeah, the barrier to entry in Wild, because it's an established format, is pretty high already, and so something would have to be completely broken. And again, how quickly
it's hard to miss, right? It's hard to miss when stuff is completely broken.
And there's enough players that they're going to not miss it, like they did with Dark Lair Warlock. That was that was very early on, something that that was certainly caught. So yeah, and yeah, when I referred to like top legend having a higher quality of gameplay, I was talking single digits compared to when I was in that rank band. So it's definitely, I've seen, as a result of the growth of the format, I've seen the play quality improve over time. So
I think my last big takeaway that I want to make here is that he's not completely wrong. No. I know we berated a lot of his statement. He's not completely wrong. I think, like Corbett mentioned, there are a couple of decks that are actually very, very good that for whatever reason don't see a ton of play, right? Whether it's the Aggro Murloc Paladin, whether it's Reno Secret Priest or Reno Secret Mage. Sorry, I don't know what that was. Or like even Bomb Warrior, right? Bomb Warrior's gotten more popular, but it's not super popular. There's a ton of decks out there that are, I think, very, very good. They have these matchups that are very, very good that they can pick on in the meta, but people like don't catch on or don't have the cards or whatever the reason is. And so he's not completely wrong. I think we talk a lot about the sentiment that the wild meta might be getting stale, but I think there's actually, the top meta game is still the same, right? It's still Reno Priest, it's still Dark Lair, it's still Aggro Druid, but I think the tier 2 right now in Wild, however you define tier 2, I define it as like just the second like power level of decks, I think is one of the widest it's ever been. I would say that there's at least like 15 decks in this like tier 2 establishment in Wild, right? If you have Reno Priest, Dark Lair, Aggro Druid, and then you have everything else, and all of those decks can take games off of everything else in the metagame. And so I think there's a lot of stuff out there that you can find a deck that you enjoy playing, and you'll probably be able to hit legend for sure.
Yeah, I think one thing I would also concede is that in addition to playing unrefined lists pretty frequently, I think that what I've observed from the Wild player base is maybe an unwillingness or a lack of understanding in how to respond to a metagame. So you mentioned something like Bomb Warrior. Well, I mean, that's just kind of something that makes sense into an abundance of Reno Priest, or while still having game against Aggro Druid with the pirate package to clear the board. So it's like it's those types of things that I think again, not entirely wrong in his statement, but I think overstated.
Yeah, like it's interesting when you read through a Vicious Syndicate report for Standard, and they're like, "Oh, this week we're seeing more of this, so we should try and think about playing this card." Or like the recent nerf happened, the Broom Paladin increased play, so Soul Demon Hunter started running double Consume Magic, which is very good in the matchup. You go from that, and in Wild, it's kind of like, we have our 30 cards, but it's going to ride that out until the end of the expansion.
And then complain when the 30 cards don't beat the other 30 cards, right? Instead of adjusting our 30. Yeah. But yeah, guys, that's it. It's that time of the episode. I think we're gonna start wrapping up. We're gonna be doing State of the Wild episodes every Sunday. And so if you enjoy these episodes, make sure you guys leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and share with others. If you guys enjoy the content, share the word. And just a reminder that we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all your other podcast distributors. So if you'd like to listen on the go, make sure you guys check us out there. Roffle, thank you so much for joining us today on our 20th episode. I really appreciate it. Let the people know where they can find you. I'm sure everybody knows who you are, but just in case they don't, let them know where they can find you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I had a good time chatting with you guys about Wild. You can find me on Twitter at RoffleHS, Instagram at the same handle, Twitch at just Roffle, and same with YouTube. So
yeah, if you guys don't know who Roffle is for whatever reason, crawl from underneath your rock and go check out his content. He's an awesome guy. And Corbett, thank you again for joining me. I think it's 15 episodes now that we've done this together, which it's awesome.
Aww.
But let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, guys, you can find me at CorbettGames on Twitch and Twitter. I'm taking a little bit of a break from streaming until the expansion, but once that drops, I'll be there pretty much daily. But yeah, Roffle, again, thank you so much for joining us, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Likewise.
We appreciate you guys watching, and we hope you all enjoyed. Stay safe out there, and we will see you guys next time. Later.
Bye, guys.